Welcome to your Daily 5 for Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. You may have seen some news or articles talking about a fairly major legal decision that occurred early last week. I don't remember if it was Monday, Tuesday. I don't remember exactly when it happened, or maybe it was actually late the week before. I don't know, because I had seen some headlines, but I didn't really read too much about it because, to be honest, this whole Epic versus Google and Epic versus Apple thing is completely and utterly boring to me. I don't really care. But now that there's been an actual major decision, I was taking a look at the Epic versus Google case where a judge has ruled that Google must allow third-party developers to establish their own stores within Google Play for a period of 3 years. Now, I'm very, very lightly skimming what the decision is. I will link to the Verge article that has more detail on it. But what's interesting, because I can't get into all the nuts and bolts of this, there's a bunch of, there's still appeals that'll probably happen. There's a whole bunch of technical back stuff that's going to happen. So it's really difficult to know what this is actually going to result in. But I thought the 3-year time period was sort of a weird one. But the more I've read about what the judge's thinking was, and the more I've kind of, from a very, very high perspective, considered the decision, it makes a lot of sense, because that 3 years, part of that is because the judge is saying, okay, within 3 years, the playing field may level. These other stores may achieve a parity with Google Play, and so there may not be the need for this. Things may have to be changed. Epic was asking for 6. They got 3, which does seem like a reasonable amount of time. But also, I will be very interested to see what adoption rate these third-party stores are going to have. This has been the big question, because there are people on both sides of the argument who have argued that they should happen or shouldn't happen. And one of the things that many of the people who are opposed to both Google and, in many cases, Apple opening up their app stores to outside developers is that it is not going to be something that most users will actually use, that there are security considerations involved, and it generally just makes it more confusing for the end user. And there is some merit to those arguments. I can't dismiss them out of hand, although I don't think that they necessarily form a compelling case to say don't do this. This 3-year time period is going to be really interesting. I think part of the reason that this 3-year time period is put in place is not only to see what it does in terms of Google's Play Store, but I also think that there is probably some eye on how this goes in terms of where Apple will end up. Now, Apple has so far successfully fended off any real attempts to do this. Of course, in Europe, there is some variant of this, which I don't remember the name for, and there is, I believe, a penalty that Apple is able to impose on these developers, as it sounds like Google is going to be able to do as well with this. But the real test of it is, if this is something that people actually adopt, if in many cases they find that it is not a security liability. Apple has claimed for a long time that it is, but Apple claims a lot of things when it comes to security, and many of them have turned out to be either massively overblown or completely false. Some are true. I'm not going to say everything Apple has said is a lie. That would not be really fair. But there have been numerous cases where security experts have looked at some of Apple's claims on why they couldn't do certain things and said, no, there's no reason they couldn't do it. Also putting aside the fact that Apple, if anyone on the planet, could absolutely hire the engineering talent to make these things happen. So I think that at least as a byproduct, there's going to be a lot of attention on how this goes within the Google environment, with an idea that, okay, if there is no major problems, security breaches, major disruptions, degradation of service, user rejection, things like that, that is going to be likely a lot more difficult, I would say, that Apple would be able to fend off the same type of thing being applied to them basically everywhere. Many people think that the EU decisions and EU moves that Apple has been forced to make are essentially going to lead to this anyway, but this would certainly make a stronger case for it in the United States if, again, something really terrible doesn't happen with the Google Play Store, because many of the people who advocate for Apple having its walled garden the way that it is will say, well, it's inherently more secure than Google's Play Store. We've seen many cases where it's more secure. Well, if Google can weather this, and they open this and it's successful and people like it and there's no security problems, that argument is going to be a lot tougher to make, because in theory, if there is an inherent security or user experience problem with opening these stores up, Google should be more susceptible to it than Apple is, at least on paper. So this is going to be a very interesting 3 years once this goes into place, and I'll be watching it very closely. So I'd be curious if any of you are interested what your thoughts on this are. Let me know later.